Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin Drought Assessment webinar for the month of May. My name's Rachel McGuire, and I'm with the Auburn University Water Resources Center in Auburn, Alabama. If you're joining us for the first time on GoToMeeting, we'll have time for comments, questions, and any discussion at the end of the webinar. Please use the question box on the GoToMeeting tool panel to type in any questions you may have, or you can use the raise your hand function by pushing the hand icon on that same tool panel. Speakers, just a reminder, you'll need to unmute yourself prior to speaking and give me a cue when you're ready for your next slide. So what's ahead today? We have several speakers. We'll start off with David Zierden of the Florida Climate Center at Florida State University with our current drought status and our seasonal forecasts and outlooks. Then we'll have Tom Littlepage, the branch chief of the Alabama Office of Water Resources, giving us state of Alabama input. We'll have Paul Ankhorn with the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center giving us Streamflow and Groundwater information. And then we will have Troy Ephraim of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District with our current ACF reservoir conditions, followed by Todd Hamill of the Southeast River Forecast Center with our Streamflow forecast for the ACF. And last, we'll have Meredith Muth with an update from NOAA NIDIS on the ACF Drought Early Warning System. And now I will turn it over to David. Let me know when you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. I'm here and ready to go. We'll go ahead and start this month's webinar with what's been in the news lately as far as weather and climate events. And one of the big news makers were the series of wildfires that occurred in the Florida Panhandle during the first week of May. There I have listed some of the major fires that occurred, a couple of them over 1,000 or even 2,000 acres burned. The Musset Bayou fire was the one in South Walton County that actually destroyed about 3 dozen or more homes and vacation homes near the coast there by Destin, Florida. So while this was more of a weather-driven event, the afternoon of the Musset Bayou fire, there was strong northwest winds, very dry conditions, relative humidities in the teens, which is pretty much unheard of for coastal Florida this time of year. So it was very much a weather-driven event. However, as we'll see on the next slide, climate and drought probably played a part. Here we have a satellite image, visible satellite image of the fires on that afternoon. I believe it was May 6th. But over on the bottom right are the 90-day rainfall deficits, the multi-sensor precipitation estimates. And you see pretty much where all these fires are occurring is where we have 90-day deficits of 6 to 8 inches or more over the last 3 months. And also in these coastal areas, the soils are very sandy and drain and dry out quickly. So certainly antecedent drought or dry conditions played a role in this wildfire outbreak. Well, on to the next slide, we'll take a little bigger look at drought. And while the vast majority of the ACF basin and Georgia and Alabama have remained drought-free due to the excessive winter and spring rainfall, here in the state of Florida, we've been kind of on a drought roller coaster. Over on the left is the U.S. Drought Monitor as of our last webinar on April 4th, or this was from the week of April 14th. And you see the majority of the state of Florida was in moderate drought or D1, even some areas of D2, and all of the state was in some category of drought. By May 5th, we had some of the rain and stormy conditions that helped alleviate drought in North Florida and the Panhandle. In fact, the Big Bend and Northeast Florida actually became drought-free by the middle of May. But as over on the far right is the current U.S. Drought Monitor, And we see that abnormally dry conditions have been brought back to Northeast Florida and the Big Bend, moderate drought over most of the Western Panhandle, and also development of severe drought, or D2, in Southwest Florida. So while some areas of the state improve, other areas worsen, and vice versa, as it's almost been a week-to-week thing, and we're still kind of on this drought roller coaster. On the next slide, we'll take a look at current conditions. Here's station totals of month-to-date rainfall for the month of May. And this kind of tells a lot of the story. Higher amounts up in North Georgia and North Alabama, 3 to 5 inches or more. But as we get into middle Alabama and Georgia and southern Alabama and Georgia, really only totals so far in the month of May of 1 to 2 inches at the most. And we see a really dry area over in east central Florida around Orlando, where there are only tenths of an inch of rain so far in the month of May. Another outlier is the southeast Florida coastal areas, Miami-Dade, West Palm Beach. There they've been under the influence of a tropical system and even a potential tropical system that dumped a lot of rain yesterday. And we see month-to-date totals of nearly 12 inches in some areas down there. So they are certainly getting improvement from the drought that was plaguing South Florida. On the next slide, we'll take a look at more recent rainfall, and this is the radar-based multi-sensor precipitation estimates from the National Weather Service. And over the last 7 days, you see the very heavy rainfall in South Florida, totals of 5, 6, 8 inches or more over the last 7 days. One small pocket near the coast in the lower ACF of heavy rainfall amounts, but that was very localized. Elsewhere over the ACF, it's been mostly 1 to 2 inches of rainfall over the last week, which is pretty much just kind of keeping up with normal. And also we're seeing the more spotty nature of rainfall as we get into the convective season. On the next slide, we'll take a look further back at the last 30 days. And again, you see most of Alabama and Georgia receiving 2 to 4 inches of rainfall over the last 30 days, heavier amounts in northeast Georgia. And right there, also a small pocket of heavier amounts in the lower ACF near Apalachicola, Florida. But by and large, again, a spotty nature of the rainfall, but it's more or less close to normal over the last 30 days, with, of course, the exception of South Florida. On the next slide, we'll look back a little further, and now we'll look at rainfall departures from normal over the last 90 days or 3 months. And this really tells the story that we've seen the past few webinars, much above normal, even excessive rainfall across most of Georgia and Alabama, with the exception of extreme southern Alabama. However, the Florida Panhandle, we see dry conditions and where the drought has set in. So kind of most of the ACF basin above normal. Reservoirs are very full, very high stream flows over the past 3 months, but again, dry conditions in the Florida Panhandle. On the next slide, we'll start taking a look ahead, and this is the 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast from the National Weather Service. And what's on tap for the next week is continued unsettled weather across the southeast region, with yet another in a line of kind of quasi-stationary cutoff low pressure systems that have brought moisture and raininess to the southeast. No big amounts are forecast for the area or the ACF basin, but pretty broad coverage of 1 to 2 inches or more over the next week. On the next slide, we're going to start taking a look further ahead and at some really big changes that have occurred in the Pacific Ocean. Since February, NOAA's CFS version 2 model has been forecasting a transition to La Nina conditions, and last month, the European model kind of followed suit, and we've been hearing the likelihood, there might be a likelihood of a La Nina developing this summer, but I've been more cautious and wait and see. Well, the cooler water that's been making its way, the downwelling Kelvin wave from the Eastern Pacific has broken through to the surface now. And just in the last week, we're seeing some really strong negative anomalies along the equator in the Pacific Ocean. And so looks like the colder water has broken through to the surface, and we're really seeing some rather abrupt changes in the actual sea surface temperatures. And on the bottom is our familiar Nino 3.4 index that's been mostly positive over the last 2 years or so. But we see that abrupt transition just in the last couple weeks to where we're now approaching that negative ½ degree Celsius threshold for a La Nina event. So very abrupt changes going on in the Pacific. On the next slide, we'll take a look at some, actually I borrowed this slide straight from the NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, and it shows the progression from top to bottom over on the right of this downwelling Kelvin wave over the last 4 to 6 weeks or more. And then over on the left-hand side is the latest. This is an equatorial cross-section showing ocean temperature anomalies at depth. And over on the far left, you really see that cold water beneath the surface where it's starting to break through, and a lot of support there for continuing cold conditions in the Pacific Ocean. So on the next slide, we'll go ahead and take a look at the official forecast with a note of caution. These were released in early May, and we've seen significant changes just in the last week or two. So I anticipate these forecasts will change significantly for the June forecast. But be that as it may, it's showing increased chances of La Nina as we get into the summer season, especially the ASO or August, September, October. We're starting to see chances of 40% or more, even approaching 45% as we really get into the fall. But again, this is a little bit of a dated product, and I really expect to see these probabilities increase dramatically in the next go around. And over on the right shows the model spread. Again, this is a little bit dated, initialized back in April, so it really doesn't capture what's going on as of this past week. But it does show now the majority of the models are favoring colder than normal sea surface temperatures in that Nino 3.4 region. So with that, we'll go ahead to the next slide and start taking a look at the summer seasonal forecast. And the temperature forecast over on the left looks very similar to last month's forecast. The majority of the United States, including the Southeast, favoring warmer than normal temperatures. Over on the right is the precipitation forecast, where most of the eastern United States is now favoring above normal rainfall during the summer. So again, that's continued good news for the drought outlook here. So with that, we'll go ahead to the I believe the last slide. Oh no, I forgot. Last week, NOAA did release their official hurricane seasonal forecast for the 2020 Atlantic season, and it's a rather strong forecast favoring above normal activity in the Atlantic Basin. You see here on the pie chart a 60% chance of higher than normal activity, a 30% chance of near normal, and only a 10% chance of below normal activity. So this is one of their strongest forecasts since 2013. And over on the right, you see the forecasted number of named storms, hurricanes at 6 to 10, and major hurricanes even at 3 to 6 major hurricanes. And this forecast, I think, favors La Nina conditions even more than the official El Nino La Nina forecast that I showed on the previous slides. And that has big implication on our hurricane season. On the next slide, I'll just demonstrate a little analysis we did here years back. And this just looked at landfalling hurricanes, not tropical storms. They have to be hurricane strength, and they have to make landfall in the United States. between 1900 and 2009, and we plotted it as an exceedance curve. And the way to look at this is the probability of one or more landfall is very high for all three phases, over 70%. But then the likelihood of two or more hurricane landfalls during El Nino conditions, that drops to 30%, but it's still as high as 65% during La Nina, and even more of a spread for three or more landfalling hurricanes, with even the three or more landfalls at 40% or so. So this really illustrates the difference between the different phases of the Pacific Ocean. So we'll go on to the next slide. This is the seasonal drought outlook. And as we are approaching, or maybe even in the onset of the summer rainy season, the drought conditions in Florida are forecast to improve, which makes sense just with the seasonality of the precipitation. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up with my summary slide. Coastal dryness along the Florida Panhandle contributed to the series of damaging wildfires earlier this month. Drought has been up and down along the Florida Panhandle and the rest of the state for that matter. Rainfall across the ACF Basin has been spotty over the past 30 days, but largely fairly close to normal. 90-day deficits remain along the lower ACF and the Florida Panhandle, but much above normal rainfall at 90 days for Georgia and Alabama. The 7-day forecast is for unsettled weather, but rainfall amounts in the 1 to 2 inch range, no gangbuster rainfall events. The Pacific Ocean has quickly transitioned to cooler than normal. Chances for La Nina are definitely increasing, and I think we'll see them increase much more in the next monthly forecast.
Thank you, David. Unfortunately, that's not a very positive hurricane seasonal outlook, especially with all the other complications we have going on.
No, that's right. We should always be on guard during hurricane season, but especially during these forecasted active seasons. But the other side of that, as it relates to drought, is an active season does not necessarily mean drought relief. So an active tropical season might help offset the dryness we anticipate in the fall from a developing La Nina, but not always.
All right. Now I'm gonna hand it over to Tom Littlepage for the state of Alabama input. Are you ready to go, Tom? Go ahead, Tom.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. A quick question for David. Is major category 3 and above? I guess you've muted him, but we can get him to come back to that.
Let's see, I've tried to unmute him, but he's self-muted, it seems. We can, yeah, let's bring that back up at the end, I guess, if we can't get him back right.
Tom, this is Todd, and yes, 3 and above is major.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
For Alabama, basically, it's just a continuation of what we saw with David's slides. The northern Gulf Coast has continued to miss most of these patterns that are moving through. Central and northern Alabama have gone from adequate to well above adequate rainfalls, to the extent that in a lot of places farmers were having trouble getting into their fields to prepare for planting based on them being too wet or underwater. So, but we still have this pocket of persistent dryness. As you see here in the drought monitor, this has been pretty consistent over the last 3 to 4 weeks, where Mobile and Baldwin County have consistently been dry, and I think 3 weeks ago went into D2 and have stayed there. What you're going to see, I think, in this upcoming revision to this is the eastern portion of the D1 or D0, I'm sorry. The 3 counties that are in the easternmost sections will probably get the D0 pulled away, but we're still going to see this persistent dryness. Okay, next slide. And so we have not held a meeting of our drought impact group. I'm sorry, the monitoring and impact group, because we've been watching this condition, and as I alluded earlier, it's been primarily too much water, except for this pocket in which you see in the advisory listed as Region 9. But we decided to go ahead and pull the trigger and bring a meeting together, even under these COVID-19 meeting guidelines. It's going to be kind of challenging. Okay, next slide. So we have continued to track impacts associated with drought conditions. Some of you may be aware that the State Forestry Commission pulled the trigger and issued what they called a fire danger advisory for the counties that you see listed there. And then based on rainfall that pushed through, rescinded that advisory last week. So as it stands right now, there's nothing out there. There was a news article for Fairhope, Alabama, that basically alluded to drought conditions for a voluntary restriction that was requested by the mayor, but that turned out to be also significantly impacted by some system infrastructure issues. So it really wasn't drought related, but certainly there has been a significant amount of dryness in that area. Okay, next slide. So basically, again, as David alluded to, what we're going to see here is how these widely scattered showers that have been alluded to in the near-term forecast for the next 3 to 5 to 7 days will impact this certain area. I'm not sure it'll actually put it to rest, and so we're continuing to watch that. And the bottom line is we don't see a lot of issues now that are directly related, other than some, as you might guess, some ag issues in Mobile and Baldwin, especially Baldwin, as it relates to the agriculture, a lot of nursery and sod operations down there that are having to either irrigate substantially or impacted in their planting. Okay, next slide. So as I said, we've got a meeting we're going to announce. I'm hoping to get all the notices out today. This will be a virtual meeting. We probably will not have any attendees in our building, and it's set for Tuesday, June the 16th. And with that, I guess I'd be happy to answer any questions, or we'll do it at the end. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Tom. Sorry about the mute war we had earlier to get you on. And now I want to turn it over to Paul Ancorn with our Streamflow and groundwater conditions for the ACF. Do we have you ready on the line, Paul?
Yep, Rachel, ready and here to go, ready to go.
All right.
So yeah, we'll start out here by looking at real-time stream flow conditions across the southeast. So you see from our current graphic on the right there, a lot of improvement in stream flow, particularly North and South Carolina, which, you know, they were seeing dry conditions a couple of months ago. So seeing improvement there. Moving more locally to Georgia and Alabama, a majority of the stream flows are currently ranging above normal to normal. And then particularly in the ACF basin, majority of stations are either at normal, above normal. And then you can see there's a couple of much below normal along the Georgia Alabama line there. So obviously that's just regulation patterns that we're seeing there. But you know, as a whole, we are seeing wet conditions in the ACF. So our next slide, we will look at the below normal 7-day average stream flow. And so the most current brief there on the bottom is indicating that the ACF basin is hydrologically drought-free, not showing any dry conditions. There's that, you know, one point that or area in the Panhandle there just to the east of the ACF that has been persistently dry for what, the last 4 or 5 webinars here. Doesn't seem to improve there. But anyway, good news for the ACF, no hydrologic drought showing up at this time. And next slide, we will start looking at 28-day averaged flows. So this is a long-term statistic. So the 28-day average flows are ranked accordingly, and the bold line are the previous 28 days. So you can see these are Lake Lanier inflows, Chattahoochee River, Cornelia, and Dahlonega, and both stations for the previous 28-day average have ranked well within the above normal condition, with Dahlonega actually approaching much above normal, right on the 90th percentile. So high flows still making its way into Lanier. All right, next slide. We will look downstream of Lanier. So we have Chattahoochee River at Atlanta and Whitesburg, and so we've seen a drop off in flow for the 28-day average, but that pretty much matches the trend that we would expect this time of year. Both stations are currently ranking at above normal flow. All right, next slide. We shall be further downstream, and obviously the same trend that we're seeing there, just a drop off in flow for the 28-day average, but West Point there has just crossed into the 75th percentile, and then Columbus is right around the 60th percentile, ranking at normal flow for 28-day average. All right, next slide, we will jump across to the Flint River. So Griffin and Carsonville, both well into the normal ranking for 28-day average. And then next slide, Albany, which is, I guess, yeah, we're seeing sort of a reduction in flow. It's been quite steep, but right now it's right at above normal, and Bainbridge also is ranking at the above normal, which is 75th to 90th percentile for our historic flows. All right, we'll take a look at the next slide, which is Apalachicola River at Chattahoochee, and flows there are also well into the above normal flow range. So all in all, wet conditions for the ACF. All right, we'll look here at groundwater. And so this is the real-time groundwater network for Georgia. So you can see for a majority, it's really a split between normal and above normal elevation conditions for the ACF. So also a mixed bag. We have some wells that are much above normal, and a couple of wells are ranking at much below normal. So, but like I said, a majority of them are well into normal or above normal elevations for groundwater. So our two circled wells there are our reference wells that we look at each month, and our first being Miller County. So as you can see, a little bit of oscillation there over the past 2 months, but elevations now at that well are currently right at normal, in the normal range. And the next well on the next slide, Dougherty County, had a short dip there into normal, but recovered well and is currently at above normal conditions. So good news for groundwater. And next slide, we'll just wrap up. So real-time stream flows I showed in the ACF Basin, currently ranking from high to much below normal. Just a couple of stations at the much below normal. But with regard to the 7-day average stream flow, no portions of ACF are currently ranked below the 7-day average. Looking at long-term trends, 28-day average for Chattahoochee River are currently ranking normal to above normal, and with the Flint River also above normal to normal range. And then wrapping up with our real-time groundwater network, we're seeing levels across the ACF range from above normal to much below normal, with majority of stations in the normal range. So all things looking good. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Paul. And now I want to turn it over to Troy Ephraim of the Mobile District Army Corps of Engineers for our current ACF reservoir conditions. Are you ready to go, Troy?
Yes, can you hear me, Rachel?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. All right, so we'll start at Lake Lanier Buford Dam. The current pool elevation there is 1071.79, and our 10-day forecast is right at 1071.21. So we're kind of following the trend for that median elevation heading over the next 5 weeks. You can go to the next slide, please. At West Point, the midnight pool elevation there was 634.44. And our 10-day forecast there is 635.01. And we're sticking with that trend to get it back up the guide curve over the next 5 weeks. Okay, next slide. At Walter F. George, pool elevation 188.46. And our 10-day forecast is right at 188.6. And we're kind of hovering right around that median. It's a little bit easier to refill that utilizing some of the storage from West Point. So we're kind of sticking right at that 188.5 over the next couple weeks. Next slide. Jim Woodruff, the pool elevation 77.24, and our 10-day forecast 77.01. And same thing, I think I mentioned previously, we're a little bit above normal with the persistent wet conditions. So we're discharging a little bit more out of Jim Woodruff into the Apalachicola River. Next slide. The Basin composite storage. We've been in zone 1 and we plan to stay there over the next 5 weeks. Next slide. So mentioned previously, from what we're seeing, our inflows are pretty normal to above normal for this time of year. Lanier is currently operating above guide curve, while Walter F. George and West Point are operating in zone 1. We expect our projects to approach guide curve over the next few weeks as they reach their summer refill elevations. And the ACF system conservation storage is currently in zone 1 and forecasted to stay there over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Troy. And next we're going to hear from Todd Hamill from the Southeast River Forecast Center on our Streamflow forecast. Are you ready to go, Todd?
I am ready.
Great.
So if you've been watching these briefings for a while, you notice that we kind of switched the order, and they've switched us to being last. And part of the reason we did that is because all the information that you've just been hearing, at least a good much of it, goes into the Streamflow forecast. So we figured it was a good place for it to sit at the end as opposed to at the beginning. So with that, our June forecast, based on all that information you just heard, with reservoirs being high, streamflows continuing to be high, and so forth, it looks like June will continue to stay above normal. And that's based on mostly on antecedent conditions. So all the rain that's fallen, all the rain that's in the ground, and so forth, will keep streamflows high over that over at least the first month. If we go to the next slide, and the next slide kind of shows a little bit different. We look at some of the percentages, and you do see some below normal. And part of this has to do with the climatology from the June 1 to September 1 timeframe. As we go over those 3 months, there is a chance for us to flip on there and start to go dry during that time. So that would give us an opportunity to start to dry out and for streams to start to get low. And as we start to get, we do look at warmer temperatures and everything else during that time of year. So we still have a better chance for above normal. That's our highest chance. And then our second highest chance is for near normal. But we do have a chance for below normal during that time. So it's one thing that, like I said, even though right now it looks like just based on the current forecast that David mentioned with the 3-month outlook and so forth, it does look like we're going to remain above normal for the season and for the summer. Even so, some of these areas could see some dryness and some drying. and not necessarily, we could start to dry out and start to get to the potentially below normal. But right now, the biggest chances for near normal or above normal. And with that, let's go to the last slide, which is just kind of what I just said, talking about the 1 month streamflow and the 3 month streamflow, both being above normal. And remember those pie charts, you know, we look at those, and again, it's going kind of to antecedent conditions. It doesn't include that information. I added the thoughtful part of that with the talking about the potential for the higher than normal rainfall. But it does, just based on our antecedent conditions and where we are right now, we do look like we'll stay above normal, and that should continue through a good part of the summer.
Thank you, Todd.
You're welcome.
And lastly, we'll hear from Meredith Muth from NIDIS with an update on the ACF drought early warning system.
Great, thank you, Rachel. We just wrapped up the last of 5 listening sessions to inform the development of the ACF drought dashboard. We had over 100 participants from a really diverse perspectives at regional and state level. And for many of you who participated in those, we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. One thing that was consistently highlighted during those listening sessions was that this webinar serves as a consistent and reliable source of drought information for the region. And so again, appreciation and kudos to the presenters and the organizers for keeping this going for so long. What will happen next for the ACF drought dashboard is that over the summer, NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information will be developing a prototype that will be shared for additional input and reaction in the fall. So we will follow up with you later towards the summer on providing updates on that ACF River Basin drought information dashboard. And the second, I'd like to just remind you that since the hurricane outlook was mentioned earlier in this webinar today, that there will be a highlight on hurricane outlook in the upcoming Southeast Climate webinar. That will be June 9th at 10 a.m. Eastern, and we will include that information in the email that is going to go out with the wrap-up information by Rachel. So Rachel, if we can make sure we include that, that might be of interest to this audience. And the last thing I would like to highlight on the slide in front of you is, as I've mentioned in previous discussions, we are expanding the Southeast Drought Early Warning System, where we're combining and expanding the ACF River Basin with the coastal Carolinas. This will include the full geographic footprints of Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. And if you haven't already done so, we did send out a survey on helping us further identify and build on the needs that have been identified in the ACF River Basin. And so please take a moment, if you haven't already done so, and complete that survey. The link is here, and you should have received it in your email. And if you haven't, I'd be happy to send it to you again. And Rachel, I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. We'll make sure to have the June 9th Southeast Climate webinar included on the summary, and also this Qualtrics survey link. So now I'd like to thank all of our presenters today, David Zierden of the Florida Climate Center, Tom Littlepage of the Office of Water Resources, Paul Ankhorn of the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center, Troy Ephraim of the Mobile District Army Corps of Engineers, and Todd Hamill of the Southeast River Forecast Center. I want to open it up to any questions or discussion that any of our attendees may have. You can use the raise your hand tool or the question function on the toolbox. I am seeing a comment, I believe it's a comment, for Tom's sake, since the start of spring, March 1, Mobile has only seen about 40% of normal rainfall 6.57 inches versus a normal of 15.2 inches. It's the 16th driest such period in 150 years and the driest since 2011. About a 1 in 10 year drought, consistent with high end D1 and low end D2 drought. All right, well, if we don't have any other questions or points of discussion, thank you again to our presenters. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, June 23rd, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Central. We will be posting a video recording of this webinar to YouTube within 24 to 48 hours, and you'll also be receiving the recap email of this briefing. Thank you, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.